Hello and welcome to the Your Love Ministry podcast with Pam Baggett and me, Brenda Porch. Now, today, Pam and I are going to be talking about one of the most beautiful friendships in Scripture. Now, I just love it that the Bible shows us that two strong, powerful men could have such tender, faithful emotions. Often we don't think about men having friends, but they do. And so I'm so excited to be talking about this. And I think it's a great example for all of our men and boys. So, hello, Pam. Uh, why don't you get us started with Jonathan, please? We know a lot about David, but many of us don't know quite as much about Jonathan. So, what can you tell us?
Okay, there were several Jonathans in the Bible, so we have to kind of sort them out. The one we know best was the son of King Saul and the best friend of King David. Now, the friendship between Jonathan and David was as close as friends can be. It even continued after one of them had died.
Hmm.
Both of these young men were amazing military leaders. We read some about Jonathan's military successes before David enters the picture, which is what we're going to
Mhm.
deal with today.
Right.
They met after the boy David killed the giant Goliath.
Mm.
We meet Jonathan in 1 Samuel 13 when he is leading 1,000 men into battle. So, in part one of this story, we're going to learn a lot about Jonathan. Then we'll get on to the rest of the next parts.
Okay.
Chapter 13 Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in the mountains of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin. The rest of the people he sent away, every man to his tent. And Jonathan attacked the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. Then Saul blew the trumpet throughout all the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." Now all Israel heard it said that Saul had attacked a garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel had also become an abomination to the Philistines. Yep, yep, yep. Got my tongue in front of my eye teeth,
Yeah,
and I
you,
couldn't
you 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 say the really hard names, but then you're going to trip over a
abomination
ripcord.
against me. Yeah.
Okay,
All
good.
right. And the people were called together to Saul at Gilgal. Okay, Jonathan and his men won a battle against the Philistines, and Saul took credit for it.
Mhm.
Saul was not a good leader. His tactics weren't good, but most importantly, he didn't obey God. That's a
Yeah, he's a piece of work.
that's a good
Oh,
way to
a
say
piece of work. And I think about that and I think, if I were Jonathan, I would be mad that I had won the battle and dear old dad took the credit. So I'm also thinking that God's probably not happy either. And I bet the Philistines weren't happy. So basically, he's kind of made everybody mad. Uh, Saul might have gotten the credit for something he didn't deserve. But I'm feeling the way things work out that he's not going to enjoy that feeling very long.
No, it reminds me of a lot of politicians. The Philistines were angry, and they gathered a huge army, and
Yes.
Saul and his soldiers were hiding in fear, hoping Samuel would come, the priest, and offer sacrifices and get God's favor for them. And Samuel was the judge at that time. But Saul was impatient waiting for Samuel, and he took on a role that was not permitted. He began
Mhm.
acting as a priest and
Mm.
offering sacrifices. When Samuel arrived, he scolded Saul and he prophesied about how God's going to punish him. You want to read that part, Brenda?
Yeah, I will. I think about them hiding though. I mean, these are warriors, I guess. They're men. And so this Philistine army must have been really big and really scary. But, Saul's messed up again, thinking he's a priest. First he
Hmm.
thought he won the battle. Then he thinks he's a priest. I don't know. The man's got problems. All right. 1 Samuel 13 through 14 says, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandments of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have you establish your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue." See, you don't cross God. "The
Mm-mm.
Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be the commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." Now, we know that that man he's talking about is David. He's referred to as the man after God's own heart. But Saul doesn't know that, I don't think. We don't have any indication that he that,
Mm-mm.
Samuel said, and that man is David. But he's always doing the wrong thing. So now Saul's been told his kingdom's not going to go to him, to his family, because that's the way it usually happened. You were king, and, and then your sons, it got passed down to you. God said, nope, that's not going to happen. And I think it's always been a little interesting to me to realize that Saul didn't know, but David did. David had been anointed, and so he knew. But this was just one of the examples in scripture and in life that we see God doing things that he doesn't actually send all of us the memos. We don't always get let in. God doesn't say, now, Brenda, this is what I plan on for your life.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get told that, but often we don't. And so I don't know. I just find it interesting that, I mean, that's right? Because David was anointed as a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And so David knew that he was going to be king, but Saul didn't. Saul just knew that he blew it.
Well, yeah, and you talked about not knowing what God's going to do. It's like we have to be soldiers. Soldiers don't get to know why they're following orders. They get told, here's the orders, so go do them. And they don't know what the plan is for the whole battle. They know what their regiment or whatever is supposed to do, and they do it.
Hmm.
So we have to be that way too. Sometimes just trust that, okay, I don't know why you want me to do this, God, but you say do it, I'm doing it. And then we go on.
That's
But let's go
true.
back to Jonathan. Jonathan and his father were together with their men, but the Philistines were a clever enemy. They
Mm,
had removed all blacksmiths from Israel, so there
mm.
was no one to make weapons for the Israelites.
So
That
the
was a
Israelites were fixing to go to war and they didn't have any weapons?
well, they couldn't have anything kept up, and they wouldn't have anything new. They wouldn't have anything repairable. They wouldn't have access to any
Yikes.
of that. So
That
all
was
the
that was
blacksmiths
smart.
go and just take out all the blacksmiths. That was a really good strategy. I haven't ever heard of any other army doing that, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, let's read what happened. So it came about, now this is verse 22, on the day of battle, that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and Jonathan his son. Okay, things did not look good for the hometown team. But Jonathan had a plan. 1 Samuel 14:1 starts this part of the story. Now it happened one day that Jonathan the son of Saul said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he did not tell his father. Now it seems Jonathan was following the rule, better to say you're sorry than to ask permission and be told no.
Especially with Saul.
Mhm. This event is going to help us get to know Jonathan. And by the way, we're going to see a lot of good things about Jonathan. Knowing that he's not going to get to be king kind of made me sad.
Yeah.
Because if Saul had not botched it, Jonathan could have been king, and Jonathan, I think, would have been an amazing
Oh, I
king.
think he would have been great. He would have been great. We're going to see some of that in a minute. But I was going back up to 22. It says, so it came about on the day of the battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and Jonathan, his son. So it sounds like Saul had a sword, Jonathan had a sword, but nobody else did. And they were going up against the Philistines. I'd be scared too. I mean, what do you go do? Throw rocks at them? Well,
I
no, I
don't
guess a
think
rock
so.
worked out for David, but still.
We don't know, but oh my goodness, it must have been hard. It
Well,
was
and
scary.
I don't blame Jonathan for not telling his dad. I mean, would you tell the guy that stole the glory for your victory? I wouldn't. Um, and besides, Saul wasn't an honorable man, and he's not to be trusted. So let's see what happens next. Starting in verse 6 of 1 Samuel 14. Then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let us go over to the garrison of the uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. His armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. Go then, here I am with you, according to your heart. When I read that, I just thought, wow, wow, Jonathan's right. God can save. He doesn't have to have an army. And we've seen this in other biblical stories as well, and really in our own lives. He said, God doesn't have to have an army. he could save by few or he can save by many. But Jonathan was willing to go into the garrison, go into enemy camp. And I just, wow, because his faith in God was that big. I just, wow. And I love it that Jonathan's willing to say his faith out loud.
Mhm.
He's saying, you know what? God can defeat this army, and God's not limited by how many people we are. So that one statement really shows me how much Jonathan trusts in God. And I especially love the reply that the servant gives, because the servant is saying, Jonathan, you follow your heart and I will follow you too.
Mhm.
And that tells me, you know, we've all had people we worked for that we weren't crazy about. And
Mhm.
so that was his job as the sword bearer, whatever they called him. But look at the attitude. That just tells me he had a good relationship with this man.
Mhm.
So Jonathan was a man of integrity, unlike his dad. Um, so, all right, Pam, tell us what happens next. This story's starting to get good.
Okay, let's look at verse 8. Then Jonathan said, very well, let us cross over to these men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say thus to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place and not go up to them. But if they say thus, come up to us, then we will go up. For the Lord has delivered them into our hand, and this will be a sign to us. So both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, look, the Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden. Then the men of the garrison called to Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us, and we'll show you something. Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has delivered them into the hand of Israel.
Wow. Just wow. I mean, can't you just, I mean, I picture this in my mind, and Jonathan and just two guys are coming up to the Israelites, and here are these well-armed, well-trained Philistines, and they're saying, sure, come on up. We got something we want to show you. And, they're probably giggling in their spirits as to how dumb was this guy that he just thinks he can just walk right into our camp. But Jonathan knew God. He believed in the power of God, and he was brave enough to go in. Now, let's see if it turns out like the Philistines thought it would. Go ahead, Pam.
Okay, start in verse 13. And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan. And as he came after him, his armor bearer killed them. That first slaughter with Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within about half an acre of land. And there was trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people. The garrison and the raiders also trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it was a very great trembling. Okay, Jonathan was a hands-on leader.
Right.
He didn't ask anything of his men that he wasn't willing to do himself, and that's unusual in almost any army.
Yeah.
Generals will like to point and then sit back and watch. Jonathan was in there. He was going to do it, and here he is putting himself right on the line.
Right.
Um, his men trusted him enough to follow him in battle and in his faith to God, no matter how crazy it seemed. The enemy was terrified, but Jonathan's troops stayed strong. Those who were following his father didn't have that kind of leadership, and that's sad.
Was trembling in the camp and in the field and among all the people. So, when I picture this in my mind, I think about, because it's just Jonathan and his
Armor
associate, right? Armor bearer. Yeah. And so, have you ever watched those action movies, that's the kung fu, and the guy's like, no, don't mess with me, don't mess with me. And they're picking on him. And the next thing you know is and everybody's laying out flat. That's kind of the impression that I get, that it's that was some fast fighting for him to kill that many people. And a half an acre of land is really not that big of a space. And so I'd be scared too. They're like, wait a minute, what are we letting our camp? Who is this guy that can take out 20 men in this small area? And but then it says that the earth quaked, so that it was a very great trembling. So that's like an earthquake, right? Am I reading that right?
What it looks like to me.
So I wonder if okay, this is sarcasm, ladies. Just go with me here. I'm teasing. But I wonder here if all of the Philistines were shaking so hard they literally shook the earth.
That
Just
would be
kidding. Don't send me a note saying I'm being blasphemous. I'm really not trying to be. But uh I just, I have these little movies that go on in my head, and that's what I see is that was some hand-to-hand combat there.
amazing stuff. Yeah.
Amazing stuff. And then for the other men to be quaking, did they see what was going on and think, "Well, I'm not staying here, I'm going the other way"? I mean, somebody had to have seen something to know that this had happened. So, I don't know.
It must have been mesmerizing to watch it in a way that I
And
okay, I don't want to get
terrifying.
close to that. I don't want to be close to that that's happening all over the place around me. No.
That's almost like, ultra human strength or something for him to be able to do that, pianist, this other guy.
And
So,
I think bringing the earthquake into it was a way for God to show, hello, it's me doing this.
mhm. Oh, yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. All right, that's all I got. Now let's go on to the next part of the reading. Falling off the tracks again. Now, verse 16. Now the watchman of Saul in Gilbeth of Benjamin looked, and there was the multitude melting away. And they went here and there. Then Saul said to the people who were with him, "Now call the roll and see who has gone from us." And when they had called the roll, surprisingly, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. So it sounds to me like when the earthquake happened, everybody just kind of scattered. And then Saul's like, "All right, well, let's see who we still have." And it was at that point that he realized, wait a minute, my son's missing. Hmm.
Well, they also realize that Philistines are running and all kinds of pandemonium, but they don't know how it's happening because he hasn't sent anybody in. So he's probably trying to figure out,
Are they running from the earthquake or so that
well,
tells me that they had to be close enough to see each other.
they had to be, but I keep wondering if Saul just did think somebody from this group is done something over there and got something stirred up. Um, so maybe that, or maybe just make sure everybody didn't fall through the earth or whatever. But either way, he wants to know who's not there,
Right. Right.
and it's
And he
just his
figures it
son.
out. And Jonathan is not there.
Okay, let's look at verse 18. And Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God here, for at that time the ark of God was with the children of Israel. Now it happened while Saul talked to the priest that the noise which was in the camp of the Philistines continued to increase. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. And then Saul and all the people who were with him assembled, and they went to the battle. And indeed, every man's sword was against his neighbor, and there was very great confusion. Moreover, the Hebrews who were with the Philistines before that time, who went up with them into the camp from the surrounding country, they also joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, all the men of Israel who had hidden in the mountains of Ephraim, when they heard that the Philistines fled, also followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle shifted to Beth Aven.
All right. So it almost sounds like when Saul realized that the Philistines were scattered, rattled, that everybody charge, everybody went in. Now, when they're talking about the sword was against each other, he has to be talking about the Philistines because they've already said the Israelites didn't have swords, right? Am I figuring
That
that out?
they had to be fighting with something, so I don't know how that changed around, but
Because
they
it's
got
well, I guess I'm just looking at the part where it says that every sword was against. Where is that?
his neighbor. Yeah.
His neighbor. Yeah. So it sounds to me like there was so much confusion. Maybe the Philistines were actually fighting each other, or do you think the
It sounded to
Israelites,
me like the Hebrews are fighting each other
the Hebrews?
because it seemed like it to me. Um, but it was confusion all the way around.
Yeah,
Saul,
big
his
confusion.
people assembled, they went into battle, and every man's sword was against his neighbor. So that sounds to me like they did have some weapons and they were fighting with each other in some points
Yes.
because it was
Okay.
all confusion. And since we'd also know that there were some Hebrews that came into the mix because they'd been living among Philistines, and now
Yes.
they're going to join the battle from whichever side they can. It sounds a very confusing time.
Yeah. Um, so, but why does Saul remove his hand? And when all this started happening? Do you have any idea? And how do they know what was going on in the Philistine camp? And I don't know. Can you just explain that part to me?
No, I can't explain everything, but I'll try. I can explain some of it. I can't. It is confusing.
Especially not to me, right?
Well, no, no, dear, no. You just bring whatever it says. It's a confusing thing. But it was what Saul's people were experiencing too. It was confusion on both sides. Saul was leading from a place of panic and knee-jerk reactions.
Mhm.
His men were so confused they were fighting each other in some cases, but Hebrews who'd been living among the Philistines came out and joined Jonathan.
Okay.
Each leader was a leader. Some of Saul's men also joined Jonathan. So Saul's men are starting to figure out, we're over here fighting this way, but things are going better for them. I want to switch teams. Um, I would, if I had those two to choose from, my goodness, let me choose the one's going to be smarter.
Yes.
Most of what this situation shows us is the difference between the mess of a leader that Saul was and the strong leadership of his son. That's the big difference.
And I also see God's hand in all of this.
Mhm.
I think, Jonathan, as I said earlier, had almost like superhuman strength to be able to fight to kill 20 people that fast, 20 men that fast. And then the earthquake, and then the confusion. And, I'm reminded of with Gideon and the lamps and the torches and all that when they broke the lamps and caused all the confusion in the camp. So, sometimes when there is confusion, God can get in that confusion and work and make things happen. So it's just an interesting story. But the more we read, the more I love Jonathan and the more disdain I have for Saul.
Thank you.
Not
Yes.
a nice guy. Not a nice guy. All right, but we're just getting started because this is a nice long story and we're not going to shorten it because we want to understand all of it. But we hope you'll come back and join us next time because when it comes to drama and good stories, you just can't beat the Old Testament. I just love the stories there. The New Testament has some fantastic stories too, but the kings and the fighting and all that craziness, I think it's really interesting. It's also interesting to me that God would see fit for us to have all that, but there's always something for us to learn. And so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to look at the things that we can learn, but make sure you come back next time. All right. So what can we learn? This is a hard one. Just because someone is our blood kin doesn't mean that they have our best interest at heart. Saul was Jonathan's dad. He was his father. He should have been proud for him. He should, yep, that's my son. He did that. No, that's not what happened. Saul took the glory. And that can happen to us too. There can be people in our lives that we know should love us, should protect us, but they don't. They use us, they lie to us, they hurt us. And so it just lets me know that, mankind hasn't changed a whole lot. But we just have to know that it had nothing to do with Jonathan. It had everything to do with Saul. So if someone has treated you that way, it's not your fault. It's their fault. It hurts, can make us angry, but it's not your fault. Do you have anything you want to say on that one, Miss Pam?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am. All right. Now, the second thing I saw is God is going to bless those who believe. Before Jonathan even walked into that camp, he had faith in God that he would deliver him. And I just marvel at that. I mean, that was such a wise thing to say. God's not limited by the number of people. He can save a lot with a few. But Jonathan's faith gave him strength, and we know how all that turned out.
And it does bring in mind when David fought Goliath,
Mm-hmm.
he had the same attitude. He was going up against a huge man and he was a boy, but he wasn't worried because he knew it was God's battle and God was going to win it. And I think we need to learn from both of these young men
Yes.
that that's how you approach things. You don't approach it with what can I do or not do, but how can I be available for God to use me to do what he's going to do?
And that is so powerful if you can ever get your head into that space, can ever fully internalize that belief. Because I know, we say it, I can do all things through Jesus Christ who strengthens me. We can quote that verse, but then often I am guilty of letting fear get in the way or looking at it from a human standpoint saying, oh, one, two guys going into a camp of well-armed, well-trained, evidently a large number of soldiers, that's not going to go well. But
No.
it does. It does with God. It does. And so that goes back to our faith. And then the last thing that I saw is that confusion and fear can make us turn on one another. As you said, the Hebrews were fighting each other. So the earthquake rattled everyone, and I don't know if everyone was doing it or who was doing it, but there was definitely some confusion. And I think when life shakes the ground beneath us, we still have to have that comfort to know that God is in control. He is still God, and not allow us to use that fear and that confusion to turn on one another, because Satan knows that he can use that against me. I can't speak about any of the rest of you, but he knows that he can use that against me. And then when I get afraid, and then you start, oh, well, they did that because, or they said that because, or they think that, you don't know. I don't know. I don't know why people are doing things that they're doing. But just like with Saul, it's not that he wasn't proud of Jonathan, it's just he won the glory. So we have to be careful that we not allow Satan or life or our flesh to use those emotions against us.
Okay. We met Jonathan.
Yes.
And next time we will get to know more about David and discover how deep and strong the friendship between these two heroes was.
And I can't wait. I love this friendship. I love these stories. And I really hope you ladies will come back and join us, because it's going to bless all of us. The more I study, the more I learn, and the more I realize I have much to learn. So please come back and be with us. All right. Got anything else, Miss Pam?
No, I'm just looking forward to this, my favorite part of the story coming up.
Okay. Have a blessed day, ladies.